The November rain in downtown Chicago came down like bullets, turning the streets into rivers and sending everyone scrambling for cover. Sarah Mitchell pulled her worn jacket tighter around her shoulders as she hurried down Michigan Avenue, her sneakers splashing through puddles that seemed to appear out of nowhere. At 43, she had learned that life rarely gave you warning before it decided to pour. "Mom, I'm soaked," complained her 12-year-old daughter Emma, tugging at Sarah's sleeve as they rushed toward the bus stop. The girl's backpack was heavy with textbooks from Lincoln Middle School, and her uniform blazer was already darkening with rainwater. "I know, sweetheart. Just a few more blocks," Sarah replied, trying to keep the exhaustion out of her voice. She'd been on her feet for 10 hours at the diner, serving coffee and burgers to downtown office workers who barely looked up from their phones long enough to say thank you. Her shift at Murphy's Family Restaurant had ended 20 minutes ago, but the storm had caught them just as they were walking to catch the number 36 bus home to their small apartment in Pilsen. As they approached the corner of State and Madison, Sarah noticed an elderly woman standing completely exposed under the bus shelter. The woman looked to be in her 70s, well dressed in what appeared to be an expensive navy coat, but she was getting absolutely drenched. Her silver hair was plastered to her head, and she clutched a leather purse against her chest like a shield. Sarah had exactly one umbrella, a black dollar store special that she'd bought 3 months ago when Emma had complained about getting wet walking to school. It was small, barely big enough for 2 people, and one of the spokes was already bent. But seeing this woman standing there, looking lost and vulnerable, Sarah didn't hesitate. "Excuse me," Sarah called out, jogging over with Emma in tow. "Would you like to share? This storm doesn't look like it's letting up anytime soon." The elderly woman looked up with surprised blue eyes that seemed to sparkle even in the gray afternoon light. "Oh my," she said, her voice carrying a slight tremor. "That's very kind of you, dear. I was supposed to meet my driver here 15 minutes ago, but—" She gestured helplessly at the empty street. "Well, until he shows up, you're welcome under here with us," Sarah said, opening the umbrella wider. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Emma squeezed closer to her mother, making room for the stranger. "I'm Margaret," the woman said, extending a manicured hand. "Margaret Whitmore, Sarah Mitchell, and this is my daughter Emma." Sarah shook the offered hand, noting how soft it was, the hands of someone who'd never had to scrub grease off dishes or carry heavy trays for 8 hours straight. "Pleased to meet you both," Margaret replied, then looked down at Emma with genuine interest. "And what grade are you in, Emma?" "7th, Emma answered shyly. "I go to Lincoln Middle School." "Ah, a good school. Are you enjoying it?" Emma nodded, enthusiastically. "Yeah, especially science class. We're learning about marine biology right now. Did you know that octopuses have 3 hearts? Margaret's face lit up. "I did not know that. How fascinating. You must be quite the student." Sarah felt a warmth in her chest, watching her daughter's face brighten. Emma was smart, really smart, but their financial situation meant that extras like science camps or museum memberships were impossible. The girl devoured every documentary she could find on their old laptop and borrowed every science book the local library had. "She is," Sarah said proudly. "She wants to be a marine biologist someday." "A wonderful goal," Margaret said, then paused, as a particularly strong gust of wind sent rain sideways under their small shelter. All 3 women pressed closer together. "You know, I used to travel quite a bit when I was younger. I've seen some incredible underwater research facilities." Emma's eyes went wide. "Really? Like where scientists study whales and stuff?" "Exactly like that. There's a research station in Monterey Bay, California, where they have these amazing underwater cameras that can film giant squids in their natural habitat." For the next 10 minutes, as the storm raged around them, Margaret regaled Emma with stories of marine research facilities, ocean conservation efforts, and underwater discoveries. Sarah found herself genuinely impressed by the woman's knowledge, and touched by how seriously she took Emma's interests. When the 36 bus finally appeared through the sheets of rain, Sarah felt almost disappointed that their conversation had to end. "Well, this is our ride," Sarah said, folding up the umbrella. "Are you sure you'll be okay? Your driver still hasn't shown up." Margaret waved dismissively. "Oh, I'll be fine. These things happen. Thank you so much for sharing your umbrella and for the delightful conversation, Emma." As they climbed onto the bus, Emma waved goodbye through the fogged window. "She was nice, Mom," she said, as they settled into their seats. "I hope her driver shows up soon." Sarah nodded, watching Margaret's figure disappear into the rain and the evening darkness. Something about the woman had struck her as unusual. Not just her obvious wealth, but the way she'd listened to Emma. Really listened, as if a 12-year-old's dreams about marine biology were the most important thing in the world. Little did Sarah know that this chance encounter would change everything. 2 weeks later, Sarah was working the morning shift at Murphy's when she noticed a familiar figure sitting in booth 7 by the window. Margaret Whitmore sat alone, nursing a cup of coffee and reading what appeared to be a financial newspaper. She was dressed impeccably as before, this time in a cream-colored wool coat and matching scarf, but she seemed to be studying the diner with curious eyes. Sarah approached the table with a fresh pot of coffee, her heart beating a little, faster with recognition and curiosity. "Margaret, is that you?" The older woman looked up with a warm smile. "Sarah, what a pleasant surprise. I was hoping I might run into you again." "You were? Here?" Sarah glanced around the modest diner with its cracked vinyl booths and fluorescent lighting. It wasn't exactly the kind of place she'd expect to find someone who could afford Margaret's wardrobe. "I asked around the neighborhood about you," Margaret said simply. "I wanted to thank you properly for your kindness that day, and I was curious about your daughter. How is Emma?" Sarah refilled Margaret's cup, noting that she'd barely touched her original coffee. "She's doing well, still obsessed with marine biology. She's been researching those facilities you mentioned. Spent 3 hours at the library last weekend reading about the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. Wonderful. A mind like that should be nurtured." Margaret paused, seeming to consider something. "Sarah, would you mind sitting with me for a moment? If you're not too busy, that is." Sarah glanced around the diner. It was 10:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, the dead zone between breakfast and lunch rush. Her manager, Frank, was in the back doing inventory, and there were only 2 other customers in the place. "Sure, I can take a quick break." Sarah slid into the booth across from Margaret, suddenly very aware of the coffee stains on her uniform, and the fact that she hadn't had time to fix her hair properly that morning. "Tell me about yourself, Sarah. About Emma. What are your dreams?" The question caught Sarah off guard. When was the last time someone had asked her about her dreams? Since her divorce 3 years ago and the constant struggle to make ends meet, dreams had seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford. Well, I want Emma to have opportunities I never had," Sarah said slowly. "She's so smart, Margaret. Her teachers say she could get into any college she wants, but..." She trailed off, not wanting to burden this kind stranger with her financial worries. "But college is expensive," Margaret finished gently. Sarah nodded, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "I've been trying to save, but between rent and Emma's school supplies and just life, you know. I work here 6 days a week, and I clean offices on Sunday mornings, but it never seems to be enough." She immediately regretted the admission. Why was she telling this to someone she barely knew? Margaret leaned forward, her blue eyes intent. "What would you do, Sarah, if money wasn't an obstacle? If you could give Emma anything she wanted for her education?" "I'd send her to that marine biology summer program at Northwestern," Sarah said without hesitation. She found a brochure for it online and her eyes just lit up. 3 weeks of hands-on research, working with actual scientists, but it costs $1,500 plus room and board. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Might as well be $15,000 for all the difference it makes." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "And what about you? What were your dreams before Emma came along?" Sarah found herself opening up in a way she hadn't with anyone in years. She told Margaret about how she'd wanted to be a teacher, how she'd been 2 years into her education degree when she'd gotten pregnant with Emma, how her ex-husband had promised to support them while she finished school, but had left when the responsibility became real, how she'd dropped out to take care of Emma, and had been working service jobs ever since. "I don't regret it," Sarah said quickly. "Emma is the best thing that ever happened to me, but sometimes I wonder what it would be like to have a career instead. To have just a job, you know, to be able to provide for her the way she deserves." Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "Sarah, I want to ask you something, and I hope you won't be offended. What if I told you there might be a way to help with Emma's summer program?" Sarah's defenses went up immediately. "Oh no, I couldn't accept charity. That's not why I told you." "It wouldn't be charity," Margaret interrupted gently. "It would be an investment. In Emma's future, yes, but also in something else. Something I've been thinking about for quite some time." Before Margaret could explain further, Frank's voice boomed from the kitchen. "Sarah, table 12 needs their..." "Check." Sarah glanced over and saw a group of construction workers waving her down. "I'm sorry, I have to..." "Of course." "But Sarah..." Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out an elegant business card. "Would you be willing to meet with me this Saturday? There's something I'd like to discuss with you and Emma, something that could benefit all of us." Sarah took the card, her eyes widening as she read it. Margaret Whitmore, Executive Director, Whitmore Educational Foundation. The address was in one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Chicago. Yes, I suppose so. What time? 2 o'clock? I'll send a car. For you. As Sarah hurried away to attend to her customers, her mind was spinning. A foundation. Margaret Whitmore wasn't just wealthy. She was philanthropist wealthy. And she wanted to meet with Emma. For the first time in years, Sarah allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, their luck was about to change. The black town car that pulled up outside their apartment building on Saturday afternoon was fancier than any vehicle Sarah had ever been inside. Emma pressed her face to the window as they drove through Lincoln Park, her eyes wide as they passed. Mansion after mansion, each one more impressive than the last. "Mom, are you sure this is right?" Emma whispered as they turned onto a tree-lined street where the houses looked more like museums than homes. "I'm sure, sweetheart. Remember what we talked about. Just be yourself and answer any questions honestly." The Whitmore mansion was a 3-story Victorian masterpiece, complete with turrets, wraparound porches and gardens that looked like they belonged in a magazine. As their car pulled into the circular driveway, Sarah felt her confidence waver. What was she doing here? What could someone like Margaret Whitmore possibly want with a diner waitress and her daughter? Margaret herself answered the front door, dressed casually in slacks and a soft blue sweater, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun. "Sarah, Emma, I'm so glad you could come. Please, come in." The interior of the house was even more impressive than the outside. High ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and artwork that Sarah suspected cost more than she made in a year. But Margaret led them past all the formal rooms to a cozy den at the back of the house, where a fire crackled in the fireplace, and comfortable chairs were arranged around a coffee table laden with tea service and what looked like homemade cookies. "I thought we'd be more comfortable in here," Margaret said, gesturing for them to sit. "It's where I spend most of my time when I'm home." Emma's attention was immediately caught by the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that lined one wall. "Can I look at your books?" she asked politely. "Of course, in fact, there's a whole section on marine biology on the 3rd shelf. Please help yourself." As Emma wandered over to the books, Margaret poured tea for herself and Sarah. "How do you take it?" "Just black, thank you." Sarah accepted the delicate china cup, trying not to think about how much it probably cost. "Margaret, I have to admit, I'm curious about why you wanted to meet with us." Margaret smiled, settling back in her chair. "Direct, I like that. Sarah, what I'm about to tell you might sound unusual, but I hope you'll hear me out." She paused, watching Emma pull a thick book about coral reefs from the shelf. "I've been running the Whitmore Educational Foundation for 15 years now. We provide scholarships and funding for promising students, primarily in the sciences. But lately I've been feeling like something is missing from our approach." Sarah nodded politely, though she wasn't sure where this was going. "The foundation awards scholarships based on academic merit and financial need, which is important certainly. But we don't often get to see the human stories behind the applications. We don't get to witness the passion, the curiosity, the pure joy of learning that we're trying to foster." Margaret's eyes moved to Emma, who was now completely absorbed in her book. "When I met Emma that day in the rain, when I saw how her face lit up talking about marine biology, it reminded me why I started this foundation in the first place. She does love science," Sarah said softly. "I can see that. But here's what struck me even more. Her mother, working multiple jobs, exhausted from a long day, still took the time to share her only umbrella with a stranger. Still raised a daughter who is curious and kind and well-spoken. That tells me everything I need to know about both of you." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I just did what anyone would do." "Did you?" "Because I stood in that rain for 20 minutes before you came along, Sarah. Dozens of people walked past without a second glance." Emma looked up from her book. "Mum, did you know that some coral reefs can live for thousands of years, and they're like underwater cities for fish?" Margaret beamed. "Exactly. Emma, would you like to see something special?" She led them to what she called her project room, a space that looked like a cross between an office and a laboratory. One wall was covered with photographs of marine research facilities, underwater scenes, and groups of young people in lab coats. A large computer monitor displayed what appeared to be live footage from an underwater camera. "This is a live feed from a research station in the Florida Keys," Margaret explained to Emma, whose jaw had dropped. The foundation helps fund their work studying coral reef restoration. This is incredible, Emma breathed, moving closer to the screen. Are those parrotfish? Very good eye. Yes, they are. Emma, how would you like to visit a place like this? Emma spun around, her eyes wide. Visit? Like actually go there? Margaret nodded, then turned to Sarah. Which brings me to my proposal. Sarah, I've been thinking about expanding the foundation's work to include a mentorship component. Instead of just writing checks, I want to work directly with families to provide not just financial support but guidance, opportunities and real relationships. Sarah's heart began to beat faster. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that you and Emma become my first official mentor family. The foundation would cover Emma's summer program at Northwestern, all of it, including room and board. But more than that, I'd like to work with Emma throughout her high school years, helping her explore different aspects of marine biology, connecting her with researchers, making sure she has every opportunity to pursue her dreams. Sarah felt dizzy. Margaret, that's incredibly generous, but I couldn't possibly accept. There's more, Margaret continued gently. I'd also like to offer you a position with the foundation. I need someone to help me develop and coordinate this new mentorship program, someone who understands what it's like to struggle, to work multiple jobs, to worry about providing for a child, someone who can help me identify families who would benefit from this kind of support. Sarah stared at her, speechless. A job with a foundation, working to help other families like hers. The salary would be $50,000 a year to start, plus benefits, Margaret continued. It would mean you could quit the diner and the office cleaning. You could go back to school part-time if you wanted to finish your education degree. And, most importantly, you'd have time. Time to be with Emma. Time to be involved in her education. Time to be a mother instead of just a provider. Emma had been listening to every word, and now she rushed over to throw her arms around Sarah. Mom, could we? Could we really? Sarah looked from her daughter's hopeful face to Margaret's kind eyes, feeling like she was in a dream. This was too good to be true. There had to be a catch. Why, she asked quietly. Why us? Why me? Margaret's expression grew thoughtful. Do you know, Sarah, that I've been wealthy my entire life? I inherited the foundation from my late husband, along with more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I've written thousands of checks to worthy causes, attended countless charity, given speeches about the importance of education. But until I met you and Emma, I'd never experienced the pure satisfaction of a truly generous act. She moved to the window, looking out at her perfectly manicured gardens. When you shared that umbrella with me, you had no idea who I was. You saw someone who needed help and you helped. No questions, no hesitation, no expectation of anything in return. That's rare, Sarah, that's precious. And that's exactly the kind of value I want to build into this program. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Margaret, I don't know what to say. Say. Yes, Emma whispered urgently. Please, Mom, say yes. Margaret turned back to them with a smile. Think about it over the weekend, but Sarah, I want you to know this isn't charity, this is partnership. I need you as much as you need this opportunity. I've been looking for my purpose, for a way to make my resources truly meaningful. You and Emma, you've given me that. As they prepared to leave, Margaret handed Emma a wrapped package. A little something to think about over the weekend. In the car on the way home, Emma tore open the wrapping to reveal a beautiful hardcover book about marine biology careers, along with a letter of introduction to Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a marine biologist at the Shed Aquarium. Mom, Emma said, quietly as they watched the mansion disappear behind them. I think our whole life just changed. Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand, hardly daring to believe it might be true. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the conference room of the Whitmore Educational Foundation, looking out at a group of 15 families who had gathered for the program's first official orientation meeting. Her title was Family Relations Coordinator. But really, she was doing what came naturally, listening to parents' concerns, understanding their children's dreams, and helping to bridge the gap between need and opportunity. Mrs. Patterson, I completely understand your concerns about Tommy being away from home for the robotics camp, Sarah was saying to a worried mother whose 13-year-old son had been selected for a summer engineering program. Emma felt the same way about her program. What helped us was setting up regular video calls and having her send photos of everything she was learning. Emma herself was practically glowing as she showed the younger kids pictures from her 3 weeks at Northwestern's marine biology program. She'd come home with stories about DNA sequencing, underwater photography, and a determination to study marine conservation that burned brighter than ever. "And this is Dr. Peterson," Emma explained, pointing to a photo of herself in a lab coat, standing next to a tall woman with kind eyes. "She's studying how microplastics affect plankton populations. She said if I keep my grades up and take AP biology next year, I might be able to volunteer in her lab during the summer." Sarah watched her daughter with amazement. The shy 12-year-old who used to bury her nose in library books had transformed into a confident young woman who could explain complex scientific concepts to kids half her age. The program had given Emma more than just knowledge. It had given her a vision of her future and the confidence to pursue it. "Sarah, could I see you for a moment?" Margaret appeared at her elbow, looking elegant as always in a navy suit and pearls. They stepped into Margaret's office, where wall-to-wall windows overlooked Grant Park and Lake Michigan stretched to the horizon. "How are you settling in?" Margaret asked, settling behind her mahogany desk. "Better than I ever imagined," Sarah replied honestly. "Margaret, 6 months ago, I was serving coffee and worrying about how to pay Emma's school fees. Now I'm helping families access opportunities I never dreamed were possible. Sometimes I have to pinch myself." Margaret smiled. "And how are the college applications coming along?" Sarah had decided to finish her education degree through night classes at DePaul University, between her foundation salary and the tuition assistance program Margaret had quietly arranged. It was actually feasible now. "Good, really good. My professors are encouraging me to consider specializing in educational counseling. They think my experience working with families like ours could be valuable in schools serving low-income communities. I think they're right. In fact, I have a proposition for you." Sarah raised an eyebrow. In the past 6 months, she'd learned that Margaret's propositions tended to be life-changing. "The Chicago public school system has approached us about expanding our mentorship program. They want to pilot a program where foundation coordinators work directly in schools to identify students who could benefit from our support and to help families navigate the application processes for specialized programs." Sarah felt a familiar flutter of excitement. "That sounds incredible. It would mean a promotion for you, Educational Outreach Director. You'd be developing curriculum, training other coordinators, working directly with principals and counselors. It's essentially the job you've been preparing for without realizing it." Before Sarah could respond, there was a knock on the door. Emma peeked in, her face flushed with excitement. "Mom, Mrs. Whitmore, Dr. Martinez from the Shed Aquarium is here, and she wants to talk to me about their high school internship program." Margaret and Sarah exchanged glances, and both started laughing. "Go," Margaret said, waving Emma away. "Dreams don't wait for convenient timing." As Emma rushed off, Margaret turned back to Sarah. "You know, I've been thinking about that day in the rain. You shared your umbrella because it was the right thing to do. You had no idea it would lead to all this." Sarah nodded, looking out at the lake where the late afternoon sun was turning the water gold. "I've been thinking about it too. I used to worry that I wasn't providing enough for Emma, that I was failing her somehow. But I think maybe I was teaching her the most important thing without realizing it, which is that how we treat other people, especially when we have nothing to gain from it, that's what defines who we are. Everything else is just circumstances." Margaret leaned back in her chair, her eyes twinkling. "You know, Sarah, I have a confession to make. That day in the rain, I wasn't waiting for my driver." Sarah turned, surprised. "You weren't?" "I'd just come from a very frustrating board meeting, where we'd spent 2 hours discussing how to spend $1 million donation and gotten absolutely nowhere. I was walking in the rain, feeling sorry for myself, wondering if all our foundation work was just moving numbers around on paper, without actually touching people's lives. And then you appeared with your little dollar store umbrella and reminded me what generosity actually looks like." Sarah shook her head, smiling. "So you're telling me that whole thing was fate, coincidence, divine intervention?" Margaret shrugged. "Does it matter? The point is, we found each other when we both needed it most. You needed opportunity, and I needed purpose. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor about how it arranges these things." A year later, the Whitmore Foundation's mentorship program had expanded to 12 Chicago schools and was serving over 300 families. Sarah's office wall was covered with photos and letters from students who had attended summer programs, won science fairs, received scholarships, and discovered dreams they never knew they had. Emma, now in 8th grade, spent her weekends volunteering. At the Shed Aquarium, and had already been accepted to Lincoln Park High School's prestigious science academy. She'd grown 3 inches and seemed to grow more confident every day, but she still insisted on carrying the same little black umbrella her mother had shared that rainy November afternoon. "For luck," she'd say when people asked about it. "You never know when you might meet someone who needs it." And Sarah, who had started the year as a tired waitress with big dreams and small possibilities, now spent her days helping other families discover that sometimes the most extraordinary changes begin with the smallest acts of kindness. The umbrella itself sat in a place of honor on Margaret's desk, retired from weather duty, but serving as a daily reminder that generosity, real generosity, has nothing to do with how much you have and everything to do with how willing you are to share it. Because sometimes, when you give what little you have to someone who needs it, you discover that you've actually given yourself the thing you needed most, a chance to become who you were always meant to be.